Parents in schools, are they a help or a hindrance? Hello and welcome to The Big Debate. Now, they're a key part of a school's makeup, from the way they raise their children to getting involved in administration. Parents set the tone of a school. But all teachers have stories about disengaged or uncaring parents, as well as pushy or even violent ones. So how closely should parents be involved in schools, and is allowing them to set up new state schools of their own a good idea? Joining me, the journalist Toby Young, who's setting up his own school in West London, the General Secretary of the ATL, Mary Boustard, former Conservative Party advisor on education, Rachel Wolfe, who's now established the New Schools Network, the Executive Principal of the Oasis School, John Murphy, and the journalist and school governor, Fiona Miller. And we've brought together an audience of teachers, parents, governors and pupils for tonight's Big Debate. So how involved should parents be in the running of schools? In general terms, Toby.
I think they should be as involved as they're willing to get. In the case of our group, what we're trying to do is we're hoping to set up an academy in which the 250-strong parent group that I'm leading will be the main sponsor. And that means that in addition to setting up the school, we'll design the school's ethos, we'll have a hand in designing the school's curriculum, and we'll appoint the head, and then we'll form the majority on the Board of Governors. But I should say that it's actually inaccurate to describe my group as a parent group. It is actually a parent and teacher group. Many of the people on the steering committee are very senior teachers. So it's not like a bunch of nutters and ignoramuses kind of devising a school from scratch. We've got some very experienced people who have some very shrewd ideas about how to set up a high-performing state secondary school. OK, Mary, how involved should parents be? I mean, can they be too involved?
Yes, they can be too involved. I mean, parents should be the teacher's best friend, and they should be there should be a very good and active relationship between teachers and parents in support of teachers' pupils and parents' children. They can be too involved, and that can be very damaging both for the child and for their progress in the school. Rachel Wolfe, can parents be too involved?
Oh, I think there are different kinds of involvement, and there's whether a parent should be allowed to do absolutely anything with the school their child goes to, and clearly teachers should be protected and there should be limits to that. There's whether parents should be allowed to go and set up their own schools if they really feel that what current provision is right is unacceptable. And then, which I think is the most important thing, is whether parents should be able to make a meaningful decision in the first place about which school their child goes to. And I think that's what's really lacking at the moment, particularly in the most deprived areas.
So overall, parents aren't involved enough?
I think at the moment what we have is a situation where people who have money are able to make those meaningful choices and get involved in the way they can, but others can't.
OK, John Murphy.
I think that parents ought to be involved as much as possible for the school community to be successful. And it depends on the sort of community that you're serving. Many parents that we work with have had a very unsuccessful experience of school themselves, so what we want to be able to do, invite them to work with partnership as much as possible and provide as much information as possible so they don't feel marginalised in the process of their child's education.
Fiona Miller.
Yes, well, I've been a parent governor for about 20 years, so obviously I'm very in favour of parental involvement. I've been involved in turning around a failing primary school where my children were pupils. But I think it's really important to make the distinction between parental involvement in schools and parental engagement in their children's learning or education, because actually they're two entirely different things. And a parent doesn't ever need to step across the threshold of the school to make a real difference to how their children achieve, because so much of it is to do with what goes on in the home. And I think these two things often get muddled up in the public debate, and it's important to keep them separate.
But do you see your own history as having been essentially a parent, being involved in your children's education, or an educational specialist who wanted to do good?
Well, I mean, my children would probably say you've spent so much time being a governor that you haven't spent enough time with us. And I think that's partly true, because I became very involved in trying to make the school better. And it may well have been at the expense of the time I was spending with them at home. But I think the really important thing for schools is to support parents to help their children learn. And there are a number of things we know now about what goes on in the home that is important. And I think that's the sort of thing you're talking about. I mean, when parents are struggling at home, they do often need extra support. But that's completely different to joining a governing body or being on the PTA, which often is the more articulate, confident parents who will do that. OK, well, new technology and regulation are changing the relationship between teachers and parents. So is there a limit to how involved parents should be?
It's now possible for parents to monitor almost every aspect of their child's education and school life. Online reporting and home access means mums and dads can check up on their child's attendance and find information on their progress, achievement and behaviour, all from the comfort of their homes or offices.
For a number of parents, and for a large number of parents, it can be quite difficult for them to access school and be able to talk to a teacher during the school working day, and they want to be able to access them at a time that suits them and when they have the time.
A convenient way then of encouraging parental engagement.
I think it's not too short or too over the top to actually say it could revolutionise the relationship between schools and children. I mean, just think of it, knowing what's going on in lessons all of the time, real-time knowledge.
But should there be a limit to how involved parents can be? A recent survey by government technology agency Bector found that nearly 1 in 10 teachers thought the level of contact they had with parents was already too much.
There are parents who are far too pushy and at the school gates writing emails, wanting responses to things all the time, and that is extremely annoying. I actually think that constitutes a waste of head teachers and teachers' time, which to me is as serious as wasting police time.
While parents may want to ensure their children are getting the best education they can, some teachers feel they are being blamed for things completely beyond their control. So what's the solution? Rachel Wolfe, are you horrified to hear a union boss talking about parents wasting his time?
No, I think I understand where he's coming from, but I just want to go back to that technology thing at the beginning. I think information is really key here. I think one of the reasons that parents often feel very worried about what's going on in schools is because they don't really know what's going on. We've had this culture where we haven't perhaps given them enough information. And what that's doing is saying, well, OK, this is exactly how my child's doing. And if they are concerned about that, then they have a right to complain. And most importantly, they ought to have a right to send them to a different school.
Mary Bastard, this is akin to wasting police time. I mean, a lot of parents would say that's pretty arrogant.
I wouldn't use that phrase myself, although I do think that there's a lot that's said about real-time, on-time reporting. And when Vernon Coker says real-time reporting in lessons, I don't think most 15-year-olds want their parents to know immediately if they make a joke and the teacher says, can you be quiet and concentrate on your work? I mean, surely there has to be, at some stage in schooling, proper disengagement, not that the parents completely disengage, but so that the young people can start taking responsibility for themselves. When they leave school, they're not going to have parents on their back as they progress through university or college. So there does need to be a proper boundaries about parental involvement and increasing maturity and independence of young people.
Let me bring in Suzanne Weiborg from the Institute of Education.
I think that schools run by parents should be established here in England, as long as the parents who are involved in the schools are qualified teachers.
Leave it to the teachers, is what you're saying?
Well, or parents who has teacher training, who has done teacher training. They have to have some kind of a qualification in order to be in the school, I think so. And also these schools, I mean, there's nothing new about these schools. These schools, for example, they have existed in Denmark since 1855. And interestingly enough, they have not caused any controversy.
Toby Young, leave it to the experts.
No, I mean, I think you made a really good point, which is that it's been happening in Denmark since the middle of the 19th century. I mean, it's happening in lots of other countries too. It's been very successful in Sweden since 1992. Parents are allowed to set up schools in America. I visited an inspiring school in California called the Renaissance Arts Academy, started by a couple of mums a few months ago. Amazing school. And, you know, it hasn't been a catastrophe in any of the countries where it's been allowed to happen. And there are some really good examples here. I see Kate's in the audience from the Elm Green Parent Promoters Group. And, you know, the one example of where parents have been allowed to set up a school is Elm Green in Lambeth, and it's an outstanding school. So I really don't think you should be too worried. We'll get to parent promoter schools, you know, a little later on in the programme, but I just want to sort of stick on the balance between teachers and parents. Yes, I mean, up at the top there, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Mary said. I think that whilst parental involvement is very important, as a teacher, I know that, you know, there comes a point where there has to be a transition period, which is also best for the students, because hopefully our job is to prepare them, to send them on to further education and just to life. And school is about more than the academic experience, but it's about developing themselves as young people. And I know that I would have, you know, GCSE students, and I'd get an email or a letter, you know, or a phone call from parents saying, we're very sorry, such and such couldn't finish their coursework last night, our computer broke. And I think, I understand that, and I understand these things happen, but actually, I want that student to come and tell me that. It doesn't really mean so much coming from you. You know, and young people have to know that actually, if they can't go into work on a certain day because they don't feel well, their mum can't call up for them. They have to take responsibility and call and say, do you know what, I'm really sorry, but this has happened, and that's important.
Margaret Goldthorpe, can I bring you in? I mean, do teachers get a very hard time from parents?
Yes, they do. I mean, I run a training company and I go all over the country training hundreds of schools every year. And I've done this for a long period of time. And increasingly, the problem is the parents. And it's because...
What, being too pushy?
Demanding. Very, very demanding. And in some ways, what they want is almost impossible. Because... And it's understandable. They're living in a very competitive world. They love their children and they want their children to do very well and be the best people they can be. But in order to... They sort of want to make that happen. So they'll go into school and...
What's wrong with that?
Well,
That's
because they'll almost fake it up. Because they'll go into school and they'll say things like, my child isn't in the rugby team. I want him in the rugby team. You've got to sort this out. He must be in the rugby team. And you say, yes, but he can't run, he can't throw, he can't catch, and he wheezes. You know? OK, put him in the rugby team and let's put all the silverware on eBay.
OK, Anisha Chopra, let me bring you in.
It's not
real. You're a lawyer working in this area as well. I mean, what kind of cases do you encounter?
I mean, I think I have to bring in what Rachel said about the fact that I think there appears to be a lack of communication between the school and the parents, which causes a lot of concerns as to why parents come to me. Some of the horror stories I've had was when I was acting for the school, actually, where parents were incessantly complaining by email, coming in, being aggressive, shouting at the members of staff. So I do think that a balance has to be struck, and obviously teachers as well as parents have to be protected.
Can I just ask the other teachers in the room, I mean, can you give us a smattering of examples of sort of the kinds of difficult engagements you might get with parents? Yes, gentleman there.
Often parents can be very ignorant, so they will tell you, you know, why aren't you being harsher on a pupil, or they will actually advise you on your teaching and tell you you've got to give them lots of spelling tests or, you know, writing out lines which are educationally worthless. So I think that's something that needs to be borne in mind.
Why are spelling tests educationally worthless?
Because I think that often it's not, in that case, it wasn't actually related to the problem that I was encountering with the pupil. Which was, you know, to do with their reading skills and not their spelling skills.
I can see why teachers are a little bit wary of parents, and limits clearly have to be set, but surely a hallmark of a really successful school is that the parents are really involved in the school, whether in extracurricular clubs or as governors or on the PTA. And my experience, I've been researching this, I want to know how to get our school right. What matters is having an ethos which everybody involved in the school buys into.
Well, we've got a man who runs a really successful school, John Murphy. I mean, is that right?
I just think it's really interesting when we're talking about people as if there's one type of person. I think what we're really doing is we're serving very diverse communities now. And there should be a diversity in the sorts of schools that we're providing to give people those choices. But equally, behind all those stories, there's always a human person, you know, there's a person there sometimes crying out for support. That's why they'll constantly contact the school.
But what we're getting here from some of the teachers is a sort of sense that parents can be just a pain in the neck and pushy. And would they just back off and leave us to get on with our jobs?
Completely appreciate it. But, I mean, one of the things that we are doing within Oasis is we're looking at a multi-agency approach. So say, for example, a parent may have special needs, they may not be able to read, they come into the school, they can't access the school report. So that face-to-face interaction is absolutely key for them to be able to support their child in the education system, in the same way providing health services. So we can then provide health direct to the families, which again has an impact for their own students.
Fiona, I mean, someone who's been very involved with your school, I mean, what did you see as your actual role there?
Well, I think as a chair of governors, I would give every parent my email address. And if they want to phone me, if they've got a problem, they can do. I mean, I just think it's very important that schools are open to their parents. And I accept that parents can be quite difficult at times and seem very irritating. Sometimes it's because there are very serious problems at home and you're actually not getting to the heart of the problem. Other times they're just worrying insanely about their children, and there's so much anxiety amongst parents now. But I mean, I think you've got to remember that most families of school-aged children have 2 working parents at the moment, and it's very difficult for them to get into school, and schools have got to really think hard about other methods of communicating with parents so they don't work themselves up into a lather of anxiety, feeling that they are being kept out and not being communicated with about their children's progress.
Let me bring in Gemma Lass. Gemma, where are you? What kinds of things could make this better? Because you're from Parent Line.
Yeah, Parent Line Plus. And I think what we're hearing from parents is that there's a real range of experiences and a range of good practice. So some of the barriers to parents participating and feeling engaged in their child's education are things like, as Fiona was saying, parents are working, parents' evenings aren't necessarily in the evening, so parents can't get there. And I agree with what Rachel was saying, technology has opened it up so there's now much more frequent communication in some cases, but the quality of that communication isn't always there, so parents feel even more disengaged with copied and pasting and standard sentences.
But what does that mean? How does technology help beyond being able to email your teacher? And most teachers won't give out their email address and phone numbers, will they? So...
Well, that's what I'm saying. You have to be very careful about how you use technology, because sometimes that can make parents feel even more alienated because things aren't necessarily personalised.
Yes, the lady there.
We work with the parents that you'd love to come into your school and can't get there because they find school really hard to reach. And I think that you know, the few who are the verbose ones aren't the many, and we need to find ways for all parents to be able to engage. And Fiona's right, it's the engagement rather than the involvement. And the research shows that if you spend 2.5 hours a day asking your child what they did at school, they'd have an achievement improvement of 15%. If you spend 2.5 minutes asking the same sort of questions, they'll have an improvement achievement of 15%. So let's help parents ask the right questions, feel safe doing so, and being able to get some response to when they do have really serious concerns.
I mean, John, is the truth that actually most parents aren't very engaged? You know, that you get pushy parents, but they're the minority.
It's quite interesting with the story that's just come from the audience, because I took over a school for students with emotional and behaviour difficulties. We had 110 boys who'd been permanently excluded. And I got ready for my first parents' evening. I had my script ready. I was really, really excited. And I sat there for the first hour, just waiting, and not a parent turned up. And then finally, a lady turned up who was Somali and didn't speak English. And I thought, I'm going to have to do things very differently. And that led me then to do a home visit to every single parent. And what you have to do is you sometimes have to take the education and that warmth to the parents, instead saying, yes, we do care. Exponentially after that, parents then felt welcome because they know a face and they know a person, and you're fostering the positive relationships all the time. But we're talking about lots of different things here. We're talking about communication with the school. We're talking about parents having the opportunity to track their child's progress. They're talking about when there are downtimes and when there are good news. A lot of schools, unfortunately, exponentially spend a lot of their time focusing on reporting poor things rather than spending the same amount of time actually saying, well, actually, we're really pleased this has happened.
Well, the parents' evening is still a huge problem, isn't it, Mary Bassett? I mean, and it hasn't really changed in an awful long time.
No, and it's, I mean, my experience of a teacher is the parents that you desperately wanted to see often didn't turn up. But I've got quite a funny story, actually. I remember one parents' evening where there was a very, very involved, very over-involved parent, and, you know, they were meant to have 5 minutes, and this parent, I couldn't get her off the chair in front of me for 15 minutes. And then the parent afterwards said, Mrs. Bassett, can I just ask, did the parent before me know her daughter? I said, you know, because it was almost like, you know, and is she breathing OK during the lesson? So, but the ones that you really want to see, often you don't. And that's why online reporting and the ability to use IT to facilitate communication is really important. There are dangers there for teachers. Teachers are the victims of the misuse of IT, and so there have to be protections. And I did hear, for example, of a school where it was a requirement, the head teacher was saying it was a requirement that every teacher gave out their home telephone number. Well, that's wrong. Teachers have a right to a private life too. There should be professional boundaries, but within that, the most engaging ways to actually engage with parents need to be found.
Can I bring in Professor Stephen Heppell? Do you think parents are getting pussier, and is it a good thing?
No, I'm sitting here slightly astonished. We were chatting before, wondering who could possibly think you could do education without engaging parents. I mean, education now is so complex. If we're going to keep up with the progress that countries are making all around the world, We just need all hands on deck. You know, we need reflective practitioners in the classroom, and we need parents reflecting too. And we've locked parents out of this for so long. You know, every parent wants the best for their child. They sit down and try and read a story where they can read. We haven't helped them knowing how to read. And what do? Do you point to the letters? Do you sound things out a bit? Do you summarise the page at the end? This has all been secret knowledge we monopolised. Suddenly now we're in a situation where parents want to be part of that action. And absolutely, you know, the schools that are succeeding, like Toby's, are the ones where they've embraced the community, they've embraced the parents. And let's be clear, this isn't just parents. You know, I mean, half the nation's children have been brought up by their grandparents. I haven't seen a hint of government policy that looks to the extended family for support. That's where we should be focusing now. I
mean, a few people have mentioned the possibilities of technology and online reporting, and technology sort of one of your areas as well, isn't it? I mean, lay out how the future could look. I mean, what could you do?
Well, I mean, you know, over Christmas, you know, a lot of schools were snowed in. I was working with a group of children who were trying to complete a big project to present to a lot of ministers. Funnily enough, in January, the school was snowed off. They set up a Facebook group. They set up some Google documents. They swapped advice with each other and with their parents. They did a huge amount of work themselves on preparing their work. They even made little sort of YouTube videos of how to do the bits that they weren't very sure about. They invented a virtual school in the crisis of the snow, all on their own with their parents, and it worked spectacularly well. We've got great tools out there. What we've done, of course, is to pretend they're not there. You know, we've confiscated the phones, locked down YouTube and banned the networks. Absolute madness. We want all hands on deck for this. OK, well, hold that thought, because coming up after the break, we'll be talking to the parents who are setting up their own schools. Will the middle-class elites benefit at the expense of everyone else? Welcome back to The Big Debate. Now, until recently, if you weren't satisfied with your local schools, your only choices were to travel, go private or get religion. But now there's another option. Parents can set up their own state schools if they can prove there's a need.
We've needed a school here for many years, up to 40 years, and the situation now is even worse than it was 40 years ago because the population of this area has really grown.
There's no school in the centre of this community, which is a very, very dense area of housing. What that means is that our children, A, go to lots of different schools, which are the ones that are a mile and a half away. They don't go to one school. And B, they only get places at those schools if the people who are living closer to them don't want the places.
Legislation is there that allows parents to become parent promoters and to push the creation of schools in their communities forward. However, what we've found is that while that sounds great as a headline, the reality is much, much more complicated. You've got to be able to prove that there are going to be enough children to go to that school. That's incredibly difficult, and it involves the identification of a site, and it involves harnessing the will of your local authority and the national government to push that forward. Personally, I think the idea that parents are going to get together and set up schools is a mirage.
If we just sat back, nothing would happen, despite all sorts of promises from all sorts of people.
We have made a lot of progress, and if we stopped now, we would be giving up at a point where actually something might be about to happen.
It's a need, and it's a right of the community, and so of course we won't give up. However, sometimes we feel like we're really beating our heads against a wall and not getting anywhere.
Toby Young, why are you doing this? Your local school gets a pretty good Ofsted.
Yeah, well, the problem is that there's a population boom in Ealing, where I live, just as there is clearly in Camden. There used to be 5 state schools serving the area I live, Acton, in Ealing, and the council, in its wisdom, when the population was falling, sold off 2 of them in the past 25 years. So now there are only 3. One's a faith school, one's an all-girls school. So there's really only one choice for parents like me in the area. And we know that in 5 or 6 years' time, the pressure on that school is going to be so great. I doubt I'd live close enough to get my children in. We desperately need a new secondary school in the area, just as they clearly do in Camden Town. So what kind of secondary school are we starting? Well, we don't want to just duplicate what's already available. We want to start something a little bit different, so parents have a genuine choice and can choose the school which is best suited to their child.
A sort of a posh secondary school that teaches Latin and things like that?
Well, I don't think that a school which teaches Latin should be dismissed as posh. I think that our aim is to set up what we're calling a comprehensive grammar. which means we want rigorous setting, we want low tolerance of disruptive behaviour, we're going to have very high expectations, we want an old-fashioned model of pastoral care, a competitive atmosphere, but we want it to be available to all children, regardless of ability.
Fiona Miller, it sounds like, you know, a lot of parents dream
look,
school.
I don't know the school that doesn't want high standards and high standards of behaviour and high expectations, all the things that Toby said, and most schools are trying very hard to do that. I mean, my problem... I've actually supported the South of the Euston Road campaign for some time, and I think where there is a clear need for school places, clearly parents should be allowed to campaign to get new schools. My worry about this proposal is that some parents are campaigning for new schools in areas where there are enough places, and because the money follows the pupil, the context means that those schools will inevitably suck resources away from existing schools at a time when we're not going to have enough public money, frankly, to fund all our schools. And I think there's an alternative way of looking at this, which is that, you know, those parents, if they have got a local school they can get a place in, they get involved in that school and they work that way to turn it into the sort of school that they want and make it better.
We've made it very clear that we don't want to in any way take money that's already been allocated to Ealing Council. So they've got their BSF allocation.
Now, I'm talking about the revenue cost. You tend to muddle the two up, and I think it's very important to explain there's money to build new schools.
Right, but we'll only get
the money to run the schools comes by attracting pupils. Now, if you've got enough pupils to attract, it's fine. If you haven't got enough pupils to attract, you leave another school without enough pupils and... you know, with surplus places that aren't funding.
And we totally understand that.
Yeah.
And under the current rules, we won't be able to get a capital grant to build our school unless we can demonstrate that there's a genuine need for more secondary school places in the area, and that's what we're endeavouring to do.
I understand that your local authority has demonstrated that. And it is building a new school. It's just not building the sort of school that you want.
Well, it's not that. I mean, we don't really know exactly. I mean, they're having a competition. The competition hasn't been completed yet, so we don't know what kind of school it'll be. But the problem is that it's in Greenford, which is 3 miles away, and so you know, to have to send your child to a school 3 miles away is a wrench in a community like ours. We'd like the school to be on our doorstep.
But your objection is slightly remarkable as well, in that you're saying if he opens a school that's so good that everybody wants to go there.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just talking about
the comprehensive that nobody wants to go to will be disadvantaged.
Well, Toby's saying that everybody does want to go to this comprehensive, apart from him, of course. It's going to be so full in 5 years' time that nobody
in your
can get
scenario,
into it.
though, I mean, the point is, if a school's better, then why not let a bad one fail?
Well, because while schools fail, the children in them have a terrible time. And it's what almost happened to my children's school. And I can tell you it is not a pleasant experience. You lose money, you lose pupils. You tend to take in pupils who've been excluded from other schools, pupils who've got an awful lot of difficulties. And it becomes a very, very difficult job. And I think the pupils in that school also have a right to be protected in this process.
Rachel, it's a key part of the Conservative plan to let schools go down if they're unpopular.
Yeah, I don't agree with Fiona that the only way in which you can have a need for a new school is if there are simply not enough places. I think there are a lot of people who can only have the option of sending their child to an underperforming school, or where their nearest school is miles away and they're very worried about losing the sense of community. And at the moment, they don't have the option of either setting one up or seeing other people set one up. And something that we've seen is hundreds of parents, but also hundreds of teachers get in touch with us who'd really like to be able to go into these areas, particularly the poorest areas, and set up new alternatives that they can offer to these parents, that they can approach. We're in the system at the moment where, as you said, if you're wealthy, you can travel to the right catchment area. If you're really wealthy, you can pay school fees, and everyone else is supposed to just accept their local school, and I don't think that's right.
Fiona?
I think also there needs to be a huge emphasis on how admissions operate within boroughs. And for example, if you are creating that selection, what level of choice is there? And so it's more having a more inclusive approach for the admissions policies. How will your admissions policies operate in the school?
Well, we don't know exactly what the rules will be when we finally open, because we don't know who's going to win the next general election and what admissions policies will be available to parent-sponsored schools. But
I imagine...
well, the Conservatives have talked about allowing schools like the one I want to set up to admit students on a first-come, first-served basis. And that would actually, I imagine, be of some comfort to people like Fiona who are concerned that we might take students away from the local school, because it won't just be students in the immediate vicinity who come to our school. But I think the Conservatives were saying if they do allow schools like the one I want to start to adopt that policy, they'll insist that they admit, say, 10% of their intake eligible for free school meals, so they won't just become little middle-class oases.
10% is incredibly low. I mean, that's incredibly low, particularly by London standards, where many schools have 60 or 70% of their children on free school meals. Actually, the Conservatives, I happen to have spoken to David Cameron's advisor about this, they're going to give priority to the parents who start up the school. So it's very easy to see how that would quickly become a little self-selecting oasis within its own community. And I think admissions are important for another reason. I mean, very often you find there aren't enough school places in a community because some of the schools that exist there have selective entry criteria. Therefore, they're only taking children who have a practice of faith. They're only taking pupils who pass an exam. Actually, if you look at admissions, particularly in urban areas, and opened schools to their local people, you'd probably find a lot of parents could get into schools that they can't do at the moment.
Let me bring in a couple of people from the audience. Polly Shields.
I think it depends on what you see the function of a school as being. If you're going down the kind of consumer route where you really just think that you're after the best for your child, then I think you've got a problem. I think from our campaign's perspective, what we're trying to do is set up a school for our whole community. We've got primary schools that are very mixed, and when the children get to 11, they splinter across London because there is no school to serve that community. So that's what our campaign is trying to achieve. We think that social cohesion is really important, and it's more important, actually, than just having a group of people saying, we don't really like the option that's over the road, we're going to set up something that suits us better.
But weren't you basically saying it's been too hard?
It's been incredibly frustrating, yeah.
I mean, do you believe it's actually going to happen?
For us?
Yes.
Well, the latest we've heard from Camden is they think they might be able to prove a need by the mid-2020s. We know that there's been a need for, 30 or 40 years already. This is what I mean about trying to play the numbers game in order to prove that you've got a need for a school. It's
Ben
really
Rich, you've also opened, you kind of won this particular battle. I mean, what's the impact on the wider community?
The school that I'm involved in is a Jewish school, which will be opening in September 2010, called JCOS. And the battle that we had there was proving a demand for a different type of faith education, because whilst for Jewish politics reasons, actually there wasn't access for large numbers of Jews to the existing Jewish schools anyway. So there wasn't the choice that Toby was talking about anyway. But also, fundamentally for the parents behind that school, they wanted a school that was, yes, faith-based, but was actually involved with its local community and integrated with its local community. So, like many of the other Jewish cross-community schools, was working with schools of other faiths and of none locally, like the Krishna Avanti school, which I'm also involved in, that was doing work with the local Jewish school and with the local special needs school.
Toby, I mean, you're coming under a lot of fire in terms of sort of the wider social impact of what you're doing. I mean, is it not inevitable that the people who end up essentially controlling your school if it gets off the ground will be an elite who will basically look after their own kind?
Well, I think the school admissions code doesn't allow you to discriminate when it comes to admitting children to your school. I mean, of course, the kind of school we're trying to set up will appeal to middle-class parents, and the majority of people on my steering committee are middle class. But I think if you allow parents to set up schools which middle-class parents feel comfortable with, that'll mean fewer middle-class parents opting out entirely, fewer middle-class parents going through the church rat run to get their children into faith schools, fewer clustering around high-performing secondary schools like Fortismere and Muswell Hill. So the net result will be more middle-class people in the state system, more evenly distributed. And provided those schools don't just cater to middle-class people, then surely that's a desirable outcome.
I mean, Mary, isn't that sort of competitive pressure going to be a good thing?
Well, schools are already under a huge amount of competitive pressure. I mean, they're all ranked and rated in league tables. We live under the most, British teachers, English teachers, work under one of the most accountable systems in the world in terms of inspection, in terms of local authority inspection, in terms of teachers' work being compared with classes in similar communities through progress and attainment data. So the idea that there isn't competition, it isn't a fiercely competitive system. In fact, there's too much competition because actually the competition can drive out effective teaching and learning as teachers teach the test. But I just have to say to Toby, the first thing he said was that for a secondary school, they'd have to go 3 miles. Well, actually, getting on a bus and going 3 miles to a secondary school might not be a bad idea in Year 11. It might be just a rather a large part of growing up.
Toby, do you want to answer that?
Well, I pay my taxes. There are literally going to be thousands of children where I live who are going to need a school in their area. Why insist that they have to go 3 miles to go to school every morning? And, I don't want to put my 11-year-old on a bus, and it would mean driving an hour there and an hour back every day.
There was sort of a few sort of howls of derision at Toby's assertion that he doesn't want to send his children on the bus. What's wrong with that? Yes.
I lived in that area. I was the head of the faith school that you were talking about earlier on, and I lived in Greenford, and I used to cycle between the two places. That's possible. But I would like to say that one of the things I'm drawing from Toby is the potential with parents to help set up and support schools. Last year I supported 6 families who refused to send their children to the designated comprehensive school. Something I would ask Fiona. If you've got parents who are refusing to send their children to a school that's since closed, that I visited, and I would have closed down had I had the power to do it. It was dreadful. And they homeschooled their children for a year. And what amazed me, these were not professional people. They were just concerned parents who very tentatively, in a very frightened way, set about homeschooling their children. And they've done it for a year. The matter's now been resolved.
It's another debate that I don't really want to get into on this particular programme.
But it's the potential for parents to do these things that I think is important.
One further point, which is that the trend now is to set up these super schools, huge schools, some of them with 10 forms of entry. And those schools aren't popular with parents. Parents want to send their children to smaller schools, schools where the children are known to all the teachers by name and where the parents can get involved and share an ethos. And, you know, why is it so wrong to want to set up a 4-form entry school in our neighbourhood so people in our community can go to a local school?
A super school like yours, presumably?
Ours isn't a super school.
How many pupils?
We've got 1,500... Sorry,
pretty big, isn't it?
Just, I'll finish. 1,516 students, but it's a 3 to 19 academy. So we're serving a children's centre, primary school and a secondary school. And the other academy is 700 strong. But what you do find in looking at those economies of scale is actually the collaboration between schools should be a very powerful model for the future. Because if a child wants to personalise their education, the small school model sometimes doesn't achieve that. I do believe in diversity between schools, but you do have to look at economies of scale and the sorts of courses you can run successfully. I think that's one of the present government's, you know, benefits about the sharing, the collaboration and the pathways.
Well, we're coming towards the end of the programme, and I just want to go to the panel with one final thought, which is, of course, that the issues around parent-promoted schools and parental involvement are likely to be big live issues during the coming election campaign. So, if you have a message for the politicians, what's it going to be? I mean, Fiona, in a way, you're sort of on the wrong side of your own party, aren't you? I mean, the Labour Party is all about choice these days, and...
I've got absolutely nothing against choice, but I think it has to be executed in a way that gives everybody a fair choice rather than some parents a choice at the expense of other local parents. That's really my concern.
But what would you say to Ed Balls?
I would say to Ed Balls, and I have said to Ed Balls, say to people, you're going to give everybody a good local school. Look at the characteristics of that school, a balanced intake. I mean, admissions are absolutely crucial to this debate. We haven't touched on that. We have done before in these debates, I know. A broad curriculum. I don't think parents do want schools that have very narrow curricula that just specialise in certain subjects because they'll have different children who've got different needs. So a balanced intake, a broad curriculum, nice buildings, strong leadership. So much emphasis has to go on the qualities of the heads. You know, we need lots and lots of really fantastic heads in these particularly difficult inner-city schools, and very, very good teaching. I mean, I think that's so much more important than setting up new schools and giving people more choice. Very good teachers, very strong leadership and a broad curriculum.
John, as things stand, it looks like you'll be dealing with Secretary of State Gove. So what would you say to him?
I think that one of the things schools need to do, that the government should be looking in terms of sharing effective practices, where is the best practice in schools engaging with parents? For example, what are the varieties of ways? Are you having, instead of having parents' evenings, are you opening the school during the day to allow parents in terms of their access? How are you using technology so parents can form part of that? What is a school doing as a centre of community, as centre of that community? How are they engaging? What other services, integrated services, can they provide? That really creates community transformation.
Rachel Wolf.
I'd say there are an enormous number of exciting teachers and charities and parents around, and in other countries they've been allowed to set up schools and made a massive difference in poor areas, and I don't understand why you wouldn't allow that to happen here.
Mary Bastard.
Well, the evidence in America is very mixed, actually. In the schools where there's been a very tight control on quality, in like the states like New York, yes,
it's been fantastic.
There has been difference.
You're absolutely right. There needs to be accountability.
Well, let me finish, please. But in many schools, parents have set them up, and the quality has been appalling, very, very poor. So there'll be dragons, there'll be dangers here. And what I would say to Michael Gove actually is that children are not commodities. And if you take money away from an existing school, and it means that it can't have a curriculum, it can't repair the buildings, it can't employ teachers, then education is fatally damaged and they only have one chance. So children are not capitalist commodities. They are people, and every child has the right to a good education, not just those in the little schools which the middle-class parents set up.
Toby Young, I mean, are you wary of becoming a Tory poster boy?
Well, you know, we'll work with whatever government wants to work with us. I think you know, there's clearly a huge untapped resource out there of interested parents who are willing to give up their time to try and set up schools. You know, in the case of the group you were involved with, Ben, they even raised a huge amount of money, £11 million, I think, to help build the school you've set up. Why obstruct this group? I think what Michael Gove should do if he wins, and what Ed Bull should do now, is create a department within the DCSF which works with parents like the group in Camden to set up what will clearly be outstanding schools.
I wonder if I could just go finally to you in the audience for a show of hands. Do you, and I want to ask you, do you think whoever is in power after the election should make it easier for parents to set up schools than it is at the moment? Could you raise your hand? And if you think the government should not make it easier for parents to set up schools? Ooh, it's pretty evenly spread. I'm not sure how I'd call it. I mean, maybe just about on the opposition.
Have any of you changed your minds in the course of listening to us, or is this pretty much what you thought to begin with?
No, I've changed my mind from thinking you were right, I'm afraid.
Well, you asked for that. Thank you very much indeed. That's it for tonight's big debate. My thanks to our panel, Toby Young, Mary Bousted, Rachel Wolfe, John Murphy, and Fiona Miller, and of course our audience here in the studio. If you'd like to continue the debate, you can take part on our website. That's teachers.tv. But from me and all the team here, bye-bye.